at some point in time, if you're the National Football League players, you're going to have to really zero in on what you're trying to accomplish, and what you do is going to have to be aligned in unison. It can't be some people taking the knee, some people standing but raising the fist, others putting their arms around you, others electing not to or whatever, because it gives the impression that everybody is not on the same page. And by doing so, it buffers the arguments of dissenters against their protest. And I think that's what they have to be cognizant of moving forward.
First of all, I'm going to get to Malcolm Jenkins in a second. And I don't think wise has anything to do with it or smart has anything to do with it, Molly.
Okay.
I think brave and courage are the right words for Malcolm Jenkins, and I will get to that in a moment. First, boy, that Mueller noose must be tightening for Trump to try this distraction technique again, because it's transparent at this point. Two, in terms of responding to what Trump says, he is, without a doubt, and by all accounts, by every single independent body that measures this, the lyingest president in the history of counting presidential lies. By far, and this is according to every single independent body that counts this stuff. So in terms of any point he makes or fact he brings out, Stephen A., as in terms of how much revenue the players get, debating it is absurd. It doesn't do anything because, as Kellyanne Conway mentioned, they have alternative facts. So it doesn't really matter, and it doesn't do anything. This is not about facts. It's an emotive issue that Trump uses to galvanize his base and distract people from actual news stories. Now let's get to Malcolm Jenkins. Why is it brave? Why is that the word and not smart? Because if you are a member of an oppressed minority, yes, oppressed minority, everybody. I'm sure Malcolm Jenkins can tell you countless ways in which the fact that he's a black man in America, he has experienced in one way or another oppression, and the same goes for his family, especially probably his family before him, etc. Even if you want to argue that, well, he's making millions of dollars, how is Malcolm Jenkins oppressed? Okay, fine. Let's take that argument. He's not oppressed. Even more courageous and more principled for him to then stand up and say, you know what? I am a member of a group, many of whom have been and continue to be oppressed. And in this hostile political environment, by the way, in which the President of the United States is targeting me and those like me who are doing this, I nevertheless have the courage of my convictions to stand up and do it anyway. All arguments against Malcolm Jenkins along those lines fail. Malcolm Jenkins has shown he is a serious person and a courageous man, and I applaud him.
Well, listen, nobody's trying to sit there and deny him, the worthiness of being applauded for his conscientiousness. We get all of that. But at the same time, at some point in time, you've got to ask yourself what's working and what's not. And when you have other players that are pointing to, okay, where do we go from here? What do we do from here? To me, that's more poignant. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you just want to stand up and protest and what have you and alienate some patrons out there in the process, go right ahead and do it. Nobody's saying that Malcolm Jenkins is wrong. What we're addressing is the level of effectiveness or lack thereof that actually exists from this transpiring. And it's real easy for folks to sit on the sidelines and applaud him for what he's doing and not take into account how it could potentially work against him. I happen to know the brother, love him. He's a frat brother of mine, the whole bit. I got a lot of love for Malcolm Jenkins. The reality of the situation is I certainly don't think he's wrong, but I also think that you have to get to a point where you're starting to ask yourself, where do we go from here? And that's not to say he hasn't done it. Mm-hmm. We're just using him as an example, but really he's done more than most. I'm just making the point that for players, for NFL players, who want to go out there and protest, the question needs to be asked, is there something else that you have in your arsenal that could potentially be effective? Because right now, to me, this season could potentially come across as you whistling into the wind.
All right. I think you have to
question, Stephen A. Wait, I have one question for you, Stephen A. How would, once the gauntlet is thrown down, like once the challenge is stated, do not do that, right? The president is saying it, putting pressure on the owners of the franchises in the NFL. don't do it. What looks worse, for Malcolm Jenkins to do it or to not do it?
What looks worse? I would say for him to not do it. I will give you that. Yeah. But my point is that by doing so, I'm asking the question: what do you accomplish?
Guys, we're out of time on this subject. We got to keep it moving because we need to get to the owners here, and it's time.
How
to
about
keep
getting Colin Kaepernick a job?
Sure.
Yep. Good point,
Well,
Stephen A.
that's a good point.
All right.